Yes.
Hello and welcome to the Young Guns. Today we're talking the most disappointing and most impressive. I know what it says on the slide. Most impressive teams of 2022. So, gentlemen, are we ready for this impressive show? Because this audience needs to sit back, crack open that pop can or that bottle of water, whatever your preferred choice is, and enjoy that nice bowl of chicken noodle soup.
I'm ready. You ready?
Let's do this.
Let's
So,
go.
first off, onto the first slide, it should be, oh God, of course it didn't work. Okay, Jeffrey, you're up.
It's all right, man. For my dishonorable mentions, I've got Alabama only because of the fact that they
I didn't know
underperform what
the soup.
they underperform what they usually do, and making the playoff most years. So for them, it's disappointing. But I didn't put them in the top 10 because of the fact. Still, you only lost 2 games by 4 points. You can't put them on the top 10. Next, you've got West Virginia. West Virginia, they were pretty disappointing. I don't think anybody was expecting them really to win the Big 12 or anything, but they had a fairly disappointing season. Uh, Nebraska, the only reason why I don't have them in the top 10 is because Nebraska's been disappointing for many years, and until they start actually winning again and then have a bad season again, it's not really a disappointment. It's just the norm. Oklahoma State, they did worse than, they have recently, but still it wasn't a terrible season. Virginia Tech, kind of the same thing as Nebraska. They've been bad for a while. Boston College had a terrible season, but people were probably only expecting to go 7-5 at best. So not too much of a disappointment, even though it was. Indiana, they had a bad season, but no one was really expecting to do too much. Virginia, same thing. BYU, I know a lot of people thought BYU would do even better, and they did disappoint. But they still had a fairly solid season, and Iowa State was underwhelming as well. So on to the top 10 that you see on screen. Notre Dame is at number 10, and yes, they were a disappointment, but it was a first-year head coach. They still had a fairly solid season at the end. If they hadn't have beaten Clemson and North Carolina and turned it around, they'd be a lot higher on this list, but they definitely turned their season around, so they're only at number 10. Florida's at number 9. Again, same thing, first-year head coach with Billy Napier. I don't know exactly what people were probably expecting from Florida. I guess with Anthony Richardson, you probably thought that they would do better, especially after that Utah game that they won. You thought they'd maybe win 9 games, but they did disappoint, so they're at number 9. Auburn's at number 8. Probably a lot of people weren't really expecting them to do too much this year. Brian Harsin was already on the hot seat. He ended up getting fired. But with the amount of talent Auburn still has, even though they're not as talented as they used to be, they're still disappointing. So they're at number 8. Arkansas is at number 7. A lot of people thought Arkansas would improve, or maybe stay at the level that they were at last season, where they had a great season, a breakthrough year under Sam Pittman, but they definitely took a step back. They still made a bowl game, but they were definitely underwhelming. There were some injuries, especially to KJ Jefferson throughout the season, but they were still a disappointment. Wisconsin's number 6. Wisconsin, their coach, Paul Chryst, who's, had a pretty solid run, continuing to do what Brett Bielema and Barry Alvarez did at Wisconsin. He won a lot of games, but started out terribly this season, losing to Washington State and Illinois, got fired, and they just underwhelmed, even under Jim Leonard, did not have a great season. So they're at number 6. Oklahoma's at number 5. Again, a lot of people's argument is that a lot of people expect them to take a step back because of the amount of players that did go to USC and elsewhere, in the transfer portal that Oklahoma lost. But still, Oklahoma, they still have a lot of great players. Brent Venables, it was his first season, but I don't think anybody really expected Oklahoma to play as poorly as they did at times. Yes, Dylan Gabriel got hurt as well, but they were still disappointing, and I have them at number 5. Michigan State's at number 4. Mel Tucker, again, you were 11-2 last year. You really struggled this season, missing a bowl game. Yes, you lost Kenneth Walker, but you were able to bring in some other transfers. and it did not work out the same way as it did last year. So they were vastly disappointing. And I have them at number 4. Baylor's at number 3, and I know a lot of people will probably be surprised that I have Baylor this high because, yes, they did lose some talent to the draft and everything. But Dave Aranda, the way he had Baylor playing last year, I didn't think Baylor was going to drop as far as they did this season. They made a bowl game, but to me, they were just vastly underperforming what I thought they were going to do. Miami's at number 2, and Texas A&M's at number 1, both for the same reasons, a lot of talent, and you didn't even make a bowl game. Both, teams were really disappointing. I have Miami at number 2 because people probably have more expectations for Texas A&M considering the recruiting classes they had. They have more talent than Miami does, and it was Mario Cristobal's first year at Miami versus Jimbo Fisher's been at Texas A&M for a while, so you have to put him at number 1.
So I do have a question for everyone to kind of save us some time. Is it a fair estimate to say that we all have the same 2 teams at number 1 and number 2?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Maybe Miami's 1 for some and Texas A&M is 2, but I don't want to completely spoil it. But I mean, it's a fair assumption to say that those are the consensus 2, correct?
Well, they are the 2 most disappointing teams for sure. But I mean, if someone does have Miami number 1, I guess I can understand. But Texas A&M has to be number 1 because of the fact that Jimbo Fisher's been there for years. There's no reason they should have went under 500 this year, and they have more talent than Miami does right now. They just do, or they did until now. The portal's eating that away. So if someone has Miami number 1, I can completely understand. But it was a first-year head coach as well, and Mario Cristobal being at Miami, so Texas A&M has to be number 1.
Right, I get that. I just, speculation. Maybe someone does, maybe someone doesn't. So with that being said, I'm opening the floor to you 3. Do you guys have any questions for Jeffrey?
What made you feel that Auburn was your 8th most disappointing team of 2022?
Because again, they're a very talented team. I understand that Brian Harsin, was already basically in a lot of people's minds already out the door, and Auburn doesn't have as much talent as they used to. They've had some, internal issues with their program, but still, I'm sure a lot of people still maybe thought they should have made at least a bowl game. It's just for Auburn, it's a disappointment. Because Auburn hasn't been like Nebraska. I would have had Nebraska on here if they, had only been struggling for a couple seasons. Nebraska's been struggling for half a decade plus. Auburn, it's only been a couple of years where they've been struggling, so it's still a disappointment.
Is there a reason why you only had Oklahoma at 5? I know that they lost a lot of guys, but Oklahoma's a blue blood, and going 6-6 as a blue blood is just humiliating. So that's why I had them a bit higher. Just wondering why. I know they have a new coach, but I'm just wondering why you didn't have them as high.
Well, for that reason alone, like you said about them losing a lot of players, that's a big reason. You see the teams that are ahead. Baylor's probably the one that I'm surprised no one's really questioning. You can make an argument they shouldn't be as high, but I think very highly of Dave Aranda. I think he's a fantastic coach. And I was really surprised to see how inconsistent they played this year. But to your point with Oklahoma, I can see that they should maybe be higher because they're a quote-unquote blue blood of college football. But still, it was a first-year head coach, and they had a lot of things that did not go their way, including Dylan Gabriel missing some time. There were just a lot of issues that they had, and I think that they should improve in the future under Brent Venables. But, yes, they are definitely disappointing, and that's why I'm at 5. I could have maybe moved them 1 or 2 spots higher, but I think 5's a good spot.
I think it's a fair spot. No more questions?
Austin, the floor is yours.
Okay.
I guess not.
It wasn't really that much of a shocker to me. The defense in the Big 12 always stinks.
Well, that was kind of my point, as Troy said, that, new coach and gutted team. That's why I don't have him higher, because if it was like Lincoln Riley was still there and they went 6-6, they'd be the number one, probably, even over Texas A&M.
Man, the shots at Will coming in all day.
Yeah. All right, we're ready to move on to the next list.
Yep.
Yep.
Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, it's Big 12 obsessed, as you can see. But my dishonorable mentions are...
Shoot for the stars.
Yep.
Go for it.
My dishonorable mentions are Baylor, North Carolina State, Kentucky, Wake Forest, and Florida. Now, I was thinking about putting Wake Forest in because they were expected to do so much to have a 9-win season, something like that. But the injuries decimated them a little bit this year, and Sam Hartman being out for the first 2 weeks, that hurt them a little bit, even though they won their first 2 weeks. And let's see, North Carolina State, injuries have decimated them a little bit. And Baylor, they went down a little bit this year, but they were kind of expected to go down. Kentucky, they were supposed to be really good, right? But then, they go down to 7-5. That loss to Vandy was just woof. You can't be doing that, but you do. But you did enough to stay out of my top 10. So, and let's see, where did I have? I had North Carolina State. Their injuries, at quarterback, that hurt them. They did enough to stay out of top 10. Had it not been for them beating North Carolina, they would be in the top 10. But Notre Dame, this reason alone, losing to Marshall and Stanford. No offense, Will. Sorry, old buddy. I know you got first-year coach, but you cannot be losing to Marshall and Stanford. But you did own the ACC a little bit this year and beat North Carolina and Clemson. So you can, so you guys can brag about beating the ACC champs, and the runner-up. So there you go. Oklahoma, I expect them to do a little more than sits and sits, but that team has just been decimated by all those guys leaving for USC with Lincoln Riley. So, of course, that was going to hurt them. Arkansas, they were expected to compete for a New Year's Six Bowl this year, but unfortunately they didn't because of all those injuries. This is going to be a common topic tonight, folks. Injuries. So Arkansas has just been, and BYU, they were really expected to just do more than a 7-5, 8-5 year this year. It's just not been so hot this year. I really wish you guys had gone 10-2 in your final year as an independent, but it is what it is. Oklahoma State. Now, they were expected to fight for a shot in the Big 12 title game, but unfortunately, they stunk it up. Good Lord. And at the end of your season, before your bowl game starts, Mr. Sanders decides, "Oh, I'm leaving this dung heap. I'm not staying in Stillwater. Even with Oklahoma leaving, I'm not. Getting spanked by Kansas, Oklahoma, and to one of our people that's in the chat, West Virginia. You got beat by West Virginia in your own backyard this year, Oklahoma State. That was enough for me to put you below the top 5 in my disappointing teams list. Houston, you were supposed to do so much more than go 7-5. You were supposed to beat everyone in the AAC conference. but you didn't. I mean, it's a lucky thing that you did lose to UTSA, to be honest. But you got beat in that 77-63 loss to SMU, and your final year in the AAC is just awful. Wisconsin, you were expected to win the West Division in the Big Ten. But what do? You go down against Washington State at home. And then a few weeks later, you get smacked around by Illinois and in your own home stadium. So, yeah, you are disappointing, Wisconsin. You go down even with Jim Leonhard as the head coach. Well, interim coach, so to speak. But you have a brighter future with Luke Fickell, so there's that. Michigan State, oh man, y'all were in the top 25 in the preseason, and you were expected to have like a 9-win season, but then what do? You go down. Like, good Lord, you go from being ranked 15th in the nation to stinking it up by going 5-7. I mean, good Lord, you got beat by Indiana in double overtime, and you lost by double digits against Maryland. Like, of course, I'm going to consider you disappointed, Michigan State. I mean, yeah, Miami, you're supposed to win the ACC Coastal. You don't even make a bowl game. Like, good Lord, a baby could win the ACC Coastal Division. Good Lord. And finally, Texas A&M.
But Jackson,
What?
Miami's the preseason champions. Don't you know?
Yeah, but somebody should tell Miami that just because you're a preseason champ does not mean you're automatically going to win it all or win a division title. And finally, my number one most disappointing team is Texas A&M. Really? You go from 6th in the nation to start off the year to not even making a bowl game. Like, good Lord. I mean, if you played every game like it was Alabama, you would be in a New Year's Six Bowl. If you treat every game like it's Alabama, you'll be more than okay. You'll be doing good. You can do this thing called winning. So there you go. Questions, comments, concerns?
My only question is, I agree, basically with every single team that you have on the top 10 list except one. I don't think Houston necessarily is as big as a disappointment as you think, because I think Houston still was a really good team. They just suffered a lot of close losses for the most part. Yeah, their defense was terrible, but I mean, yeah, I don't think that they're a top 10 most disappointing team, but they did underperform what people thought. But I mean, that's about it for me.
But yeah, it is like Houston was just a big disappointment for me because of like you literally had the schedule to either go unbeaten or go 11-1, and then bam, win your conference title, and then get to New Year's Six Bowl. But you failed, Houston.
So, what makes you?
Yeah, my only thing was I agree with Jeffrey is Houston. I mean, they were one of those teams. Yes, I understand where you're coming from on that. I understand where you're coming from on that, though, Jackson. I get why you consider them a disappointment. Yeah, but I'm with Jeffrey. I think Houston could have been left off, maybe, depending on how you view them.
The one thing I'll say about Houston is I didn't include them in my rankings, but they were ranked at the beginning of in the preseason rankings. They were in the top 25. And I'm more disappointed in Dana Holgorsen than Houston. Dana Holgorsen, this man can still, after like 10 plus years of head coaching in college football, this man can still not build a competent defense to save his life. Like, he's just a worse Lincoln Riley. Like,
So to your point, though, it's almost perfect that the Houston and Dana Holgerson is going into the Big 12 then, because what is the Big 12 known for? No defense, all offense. So if you can build a perfect gunslinger, beat the crap out of you and wear your defense down, or just literally beat you offense, then I mean, I guess I'm the only optimistic one, because I'm telling you now, one of these incoming teams are going to win this conference within the first 5 years. Mark
It's
my
not going to
word.
be Houston, because if they can't do well in the AAC, they're sure as heck not going to be doing okay in the Big 12. I mean, life's going to be miserable for them right now.
So for you, my only question is, what is the difference for you between having Houston in there and not having Baylor?
Well, I mean, Baylor was expected to, go down a little bit because they didn't have a lot of guys returning. So that was the key component for me on my list. But, they'll get back up next year for sure. But that's another thing. I don't think Houston's going to do well with Baylor. Baylor's going to make their lives miserable. Any other questions?
I'm good.
I'm good. Austin?
Where are you, good buddy?
Really?
My money is on TCU keep control, maybe Texas.
All right, well, should we skip Austin and come back?
I'm good
Yeah.
over here.
Okay. You
Yeah,
ready
so-
to go, Austin?
Any questions you have about my top 10 most disappointing teams?
If not, it's your turn.
All right. Has anyone got any more questions for Jackson? I assume no. Okay.
We're good.
So I'm sorry, Will. No honorable mentions for me, like Jeffrey and Jackson had. No honorable mentions for me. But I will say, I'm sorry, Will. I had to put your Irish at number 10. You lost to Stanford and Marshall. Notre Dame teams don't do that. Yes, you beat Clemson. Congratulations. But that doesn't make up for losing to Stanford and Marshall.
Stanford
Notre Dame
lost
is expected
worse.
to be in New Year's Six Bowls every year. Exactly. So I had to put Notre Dame on here. And then number 9, BYU. They were a team who was preseason ranked, I believe, near the top 15. They were getting a lot of attention, and they were coming off a very, very good season. And then after that Oregon loss, they kind of trumpeted downhill. Like, that's when Oregon got their mojo back, and then BYU kind of lost it. And I think that's why I put them at number 9, is because they are still BYU. And coming in at number 8, Auburn. They were ranked in the preseason top 15, and Auburn's expected to be competing for the SEC SEC titles every year. They're still expected to be the team to compete with Bama, and the fact that they have all this talent and they don't give their head coach an opportunity, that's just disappointing when Auburn doesn't win more than 9 games. So I had to put them here. Number 7, I had the Sooners. Yes, I know a lot of people out there maybe question, why is Oklahoma so low? They stunk. Brent Venables wasn't very good. Well, if you see what happened after Lincoln Riley left, they took all their players, and he was left with pretty much nothing, almost. So for him to get to a 6-6 season was nothing short of remarkable. I think if you give him a couple good recruiting classes, I think Oklahoma will be back to their winning ways again. but it is a disappointment because Oklahoma should not be 6-6 still. Oklahoma should still be in the 8-win territory. At number 6, I had the Florida Gators. They're another SEC team. What a shock. Florida had so many expectations. You know, they beat Utah. They beat the mighty Utes, the Pac-12 champions. You know, and people were like, the Gators are back, baby. And then they lose to Kentucky by 10. And then they gave Tennessee everything they had and lost. They lost to Vandy, for crying out loud. How do you lose to Vandy? Like Vandy, like you're in Kentucky territory now, Florida. But I put Florida at 6 because they are still an SEC team and they are still to be upheld to a standard. And Florida only finishing 6-6 and their pathetic bowl performance, yeah, that's unacceptable for Florida. And then at number 5, I had the Iowa Hawkeyes. They were in the Big Ten championship last year against Michigan, against Michigan, and then this year they finished 7-5, coming off a Big Ten title appearance. Their offense stunk it up. Their defense was only the only bright spot for Iowa this year, and it's just disappointing that a team that went to the Big Ten championship just last year went 7-5 and their offense stunk. And that's pretty disappointing. When you're a team that went to a conference championship, you're expected to continue to be in the conference title picture, not take several years back like Iowa did. Number 4, Wisconsin, another Big Ten team. Another team who went to the conference title in 2019. They've blown the boat a lot. They've been ranked top 10, top 15 in the preseason, and they've blown that. And this year, they've been a big disappointment because they've lost games that they shouldn't have. And they fired their coach midway through the year. And Wisconsin, they're a program that is like Iowa, still expects to compete for Big Ten titles. And the fact that they took a couple steps back is pretty disappointing for a program like them. Number 3, good old Sparty. I know all the Michigan fans love that. Good old Sparty's up here. Mel Tucker took Michigan to an 11-2, Michigan State 11-2, to a New Year's Six bowl, which was a very great year. He turned that program around, but for them to go this far back down, that's just disappointing. And to get blown out by Washington, in prime time, top 15, and just to get blown out like they did, that's pretty disappointing. And I'm not saying Washington is a bad team. They're a great team. It's just the fact of in prime time, you did that. And then against the bigger competition, like the Michigans and the Ohio States, you didn't play very well. That's just very disappointing, in my opinion. And that's why I have Sparty at 3. Because coming off an 11-2 season, you should keep improving. I get it. You lost a lot of offensive weapons, and you lost a lot of defensive guys. But still, when you come off a season like that, you are still expected to keep raising the bar and get over the hump. And number 2, Miami, the preseason national champions, as the Hurricane fans like to say. They've been a disappointment for a long time because they have these high expectations of they're going to win the ACC, they're going to win the Natty, and that they're back, that the U's back. Well, once again, they disappointed not only me, but all the U. First year under Mario Cristobal, like the other guys above me, Jackson and Jeffrey pointed out, it's a first-year head coach. Just like Oklahoma, you could take that with a grain of salt if you want, but it's still disappointing because Miami is a rich history program, and you can't be going 5-7, 4-8 every year. You just can't be doing that. And Texas A&M at number 1 for the obvious reasons, They have all this 5-star talent. They're the team expected to be the team that competes with Bama and Georgia and Jimbo Fisher's supposed to be the guy to get them to the mountaintop. And for you to go 5-7, that's just disappointing, A&M. That's why you're the number one most disappointing team in my eyes. You got to get this stuff together if you want to reach the promised land like you brought Jimbo in for. And this is my 10. This is my top 10 most disappointing team. Any questions, guys?
My first question is that you have Iowa at number 5. And you said they were disappointing because they made the Big Ten championship game last year. But you look at this comment here, Iowa was went away from returning to the Big Ten championship. And you pointed out that their offense was trash this year. Well, their offense was not good last year either. So both years their offense was terrible. And yeah, they finished 10-4. They made the Big Ten championship game. But you look at last year, how many close wins did they have? They beat Penn State by 3, and that's a game that if Sean Clifford doesn't get hurt in last year, they lose. And then you think about they beat Northwestern last year by only 5 points. They beat Minnesota last year by 5 points. They beat Illinois last year by 10, and they beat Nebraska by 7. So they could have easily last year been a 6-6 football team. They were not better last year. They were not better last year than they were this year. They just happened to make the Big Ten championship game last year, and this year they did not. But Iowa is not they're not a worse team or a better team last year versus this year. To me, they're the exact same.
I disagree with you on that. I disagree with you on that, though, Jeffrey. If you go to a conference championship appearance, you are expected to still uphold that standard, are you not?
You are, but
hey, Buck, I'm Mike. I mean, you get what I was saying, though, right? I mean, Iowa's the same team. They're the same team every year. They're no better. They're no worse. Just the results were a little bit different. They're the same team.
Nothing changes between the offense and the defense. They're exactly the same as they were last year. It's just last year.
You heard the schedule. I read the schedule. They barely beat a lot of bad teams, and they beat a Penn State team that Sean Clifford missed the whole second half. They were not a better team last year. There's no standard. They made the Big Ten championship game because somebody out of the West has to. Somebody has to out of the West every single year. That's like Wisconsin making. Is Wisconsin better a certain year that they make the Big Ten championship game than when they don't? No, they're not, because they all get blown out whenever they play. You saw Iowa last year. They got dismantled against Michigan. They weren't very good last year. They were. That's why when Jackson made the point of, Jeff Brom is undefeated against top 5 opponents. Yeah, one of those was against Iowa, and that's not a legit top 5 win. Just because Iowa was ranked in the top 5 did not mean they were necessarily a top 5 team. I mean, I get your point. You're looking at strictly from the fact they made a Big Ten championship game, and this year they did not. But Iowa, it was not a worse team this year. They were the exact same team. Last year they were masquerading as a better team than they were. They're the same team.
I understand where you're coming from on this, Jeffrey. You're making the point Iowa's no different. And I agree, but I'm looking at it from the point of view, if you make a conference championship or a New Year's Six and you don't get back to that, that's kind of disappointing, is it not?
Well, it is, but if that's not your
disappointing, but they're the same team. I mean, it's disappointing when you're Oklahoma and you go from basically Mark brought this point up. He said OU is much more of a disappointment than Iowa because OU is a perennial college football playoff contender and they start in the top 10. Iowa, sometimes they make the Big Ten championship game, sometimes they don't, based on the way the Big Ten West breaks. Like if Iowa last year was like a legit fantastic team and they pushed Michigan in the Big Ten championship game, and then this year they fell back to 7-5, then I would agree. But one of your points based on Iowa being a disappointment was that this year their offense was garbage. Well, last year their offense was too. They're the exact same team that this year they did not get the close enough wins that they got last year to pull it out.
Well, the only thing I would say to that is that I think that Iowa definitely ran the ball better last year.
That's true. That's true.
Because they had Tyler Linderbaum last year, and this year they don't. And he was the unanimous All-American.
But that just goes to show that it's pretty sad that when you're a program that one player makes a difference, that's not a good thing. You know, when one guy, you take away one player and you're automatically worse. They still got destroyed against Michigan last year. They weren't a very good team last year. They were a solid team, but they lost to Kentucky in the bowl game last year as well. They were not that good. They
And they're
were
going
they were the worst 10-4 team last year. And they're the same team this year. They're just the same every year. Kirk Ferentz is just the same guy every single year. I've watched him my whole life. He says it's not a knock against him. It's not a knock against your pick. I'm just, as a justifiable statement, they're not a disappointment to me because they're the same year in and year out. Just the record's a bit different every single time based on how the results break. They're basically saying you're right about the running game was awful way more this year than was last year. That's a great point. But to me, Iowa overall is just about the same. So to put them as in all of college football, a top 10 disappointing team, I just don't think they are. But that's why we have this discussion. You definitely have a point of why having them in. I just made the point of why they shouldn't be in the top 10.
After you rattled off the schedule, and like you said, if the breaks don't go their way, then they lose a lot of those games, which I agree with. And you're supposed to beat those teams. That's another reason to be disappointed because, yes, you beat those teams that you're supposed to beat, but if it breaks the other way, guess what? Iowa's record's completely different. I agree with you on that. It's just, for me and my list, to clarify for everyone out there, is if you were in the conference championship about 5-10 years ago and your program still hasn't gone anywhere with it, that's why you're here, because that's a disappointment. You're supposed to keep going up and up, not going backwards, so to speak.
So,
and a great point here, he said Iowa had to play Ohio State, Michigan in the regular season this year, so it's not surprising they had a worse record this year. That's exactly the point. Their schedule was easier last year too.
So to your point, Austin, if that's the case, okay, Ohio State has gone backward from 2020 to now. They've gone backward and then evened out. You're gonna get these teams everywhere. It doesn't matter what conference.
Yeah, Iowa only lost one more game this year than they did last year. I mean, so far, they're the same team, literally.
Yeah, you have the teams that go up continuously. Like Michigan's been riding this up and up and up and up and up. They haven't leveled off yet. Ohio State has been constantly leveled off since like 2002. You're getting enough wins every year to get New Year's Six, BCS. That's what I'm saying. When you're leveling off, you're making your conference championship or your conference champion every year, and you're making the BCS or New Year's Six, and you're where you're supposed to be all the time. So again, to everybody's point, they're the same with one more loss and 3 less wins, which is weird how that works out. But everybody to some point is like, okay, Oklahoma is like this right now. Mm-hmm. Ohio State, like I said, is like this. Michigan is still like this. Everybody, for whatever stupid reason, A&M is like this. Miami is like, well, I can tell you why Miami is like this. Miami's been like this since 2003. After they played us, they kind of went down. So you can play
I have a question. I have a question for you, Jeffrey and Buckeye Mike, real quick. On the Iowa, on my list, Iowa. So if a team plays for a conference championship the year previous and they don't make it back, is that not a disappointing season? So if Michigan doesn't per se make the Big Ten title game,
it depends on the circumstances. We've basically said that Iowa's the exact same team. Your point is valid. It makes sense, but it's not the same for every team. If you win your conference championship in the next season, you go 5-7, and you're just like LSU winning the whole thing, and then you don't even make a bowl game. That's disappointing, but Iowa's the same team as they were last year. They had an easier schedule last year. They escaped against a bunch of bad teams. They had a little bit better of a running game last year, and they made the Big Ten championship game, but they still got throttled. Purdue put up a better fight against Michigan than Iowa did last year. It's not comparable. Iowa was not very good last year. They were a solid team, but they weren't as good as people's narrative of a team is so biased compared to a few things. Oh, they made the Big Ten championship game. Oh, they had 10 wins. They're a solid team. They were the same team last year, except with a little bit better of a running game. They're the same team. So it's not disappointing to me because Iowa's been doing this for 20 years. They've been doing it since before I was born. They're the same team. And on Clint Moses' point about Texas should be up there, for me, no, because Texas has not ever been back. So 8-4 is pretty solid. It's the same thing.
Like,
Yeah, I get you,
to
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey,
I do.
to Jeffrey's point and my point, yes, you're going to have those little, like, if you go, I don't want to reference it like this, but if you go into the hospital, you go into a hospital room, and you see that little machine that gives, like, the pulse, you're going to have every team like this. Most teams at some point get the no pulse line. We're just flat, and we're consistent, and we're flat. Wherever the peak is, we're flat. So, like right now, Michigan's peak is 10 to 12 wins, and that's where their peak is. They're still within that right now. Well, basically, you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Bad example, but you know what I mean.
Austin, what made you feel that Florida was the 6th most disappointing team on your list?
So the reason why I believe Florida is the 6th most disappointing is because, Florida, yes, we've gone over it ad nauseum, and Mark, who's listening in the chat, his callers have gone over it ad nauseum. The Utah win, that was a big win for Florida. We could all agree on that. They beat Utah, who won the Pac-12 back-to-back this year. And the fact that they followed it up with a 10-point loss at home to Kentucky and then barely beat USF, barely a 1-10 team, and then they get trounced by Tennessee. Well, not trounced, that's bad wording. They got beat by Tennessee, and they lose to Vandy. Vandy, which I'm not saying Tennessee is all teams lost to Tennessee. So take that out of the equation. But the fact that they lost to Vandy and they lost to Kentucky by 10 and barely beat a 1-10 USF team after riding off the high of beating Utah, that's pretty disappointing because Florida's season should have kept going up and up and up, and they could have been playing for the SEC title. But instead, it was like a roller coaster. One week we thought Florida was here. Next week Florida was down here. You can't be doing that. And it's disappointing that Florida went 6-6 as well. Because Florida is a team that should minimum get at least 8 wins. That's what their program expects. So I have them as the 6th most disappointing team in my book because of the roller coasters and the teams that they lost to, and they're just confusing overall because one week they dominate South Carolina and then the next week not so much. They don't do so high. So that's why they're number 6.
One question about that, Austin. If Florida didn't beat Utah, would you have still have them on this list? Because if the Utah raised your expectations and then they disappointed you after that game. So is that why they're disappointing? Only because they beat Utah and then lost to Kentucky and Vandy?
Yes, part of it is part of that. Well, yes, it is. Because when you beat a team at the caliber of Utah and you don't continue to follow it up, you can't lose at home to Kentucky. You just can't do that. By 10 points nonetheless. And Kentucky is a good team, don't get me wrong. But you can't follow it up coming out flat. If you are what you say you are, if everyone's proclaiming Florida as they're the SEC contenders, that they are the team that could possibly be in the SEC title game in December. They need to keep playing like that all year long. You can't just have one good game at the beginning of the year and then the next 2 or 3 games come out really flat and lose those games or barely hang on and win to teams that are below you.
Florida and Auburn are disappointments in general because of the fact
So it's
that
kind of disappointing when they do that.
They have talent,
And then
but they didn't do very well. I mean, Florida was 6-7, Auburn was 5-7. I mean, they should be 7-8 win teams. Yes, they play hard schedules, but they should have been better than that. Especially to Austin's point about the Utah win, that is a big reason why they are on the list. Because yes, everybody's expectations went through the roof when they beat Utah, and then they went all over the place. I mean, at times they dismantled South Carolina. I mean, at times they look like a team that should be in the top 15 at the highest. But then at other times they didn't even look like a bowl team. And you saw what happened in the bowl game, even though they had opt-outs. They were way too inconsistent. They should have been better.
Any other questions for me?
Well, Dustin's asked, where's Louisville on this list? Do you think Louisville was a little disappointing this year?
I think he was asking that he's a Louisville fan, I think, is what he was asking. Because Edward responded with, yes, Austin's a Louisville fan. Oh, and then he says, I know, and I'm asking for there. Okay, he was asked. Sorry. I didn't see that. It came up finally.
Wow.
For me personally, they weren't disappointing because I was expecting 7 to 8 wins. Personally, the only disappointing thing to me was when we lost to Boston College. That was really disappointing. But I wasn't expecting us to compete for no ACC title. I wasn't expecting no New Year's Six. I wasn't expecting none of that. My expectations was, okay, ceiling is 8-4. That's a really good year right now. My expectations was 7-5, 6-6. Worst we could do the floor was 4-8. So they weren't a disappointment to me.
Okay. Do you think they would have won the Coastal this year if they're in the Coastal?
I don't know. That was maybe if a couple games bounce our way, because the Florida State game, I know not to go too off into the ditch, but the Florida State game, if we don't shoot ourselves in the foot with 3 turnovers, we might win that game. And there's 8 wins right there.
You know, Austin,
And
it kind of sounds like Iowa, though, really, when you talk about, where they should be at and everything, what they did. It sounds just like Iowa.
But here's the thing, though. Iowa went to the Big Ten Championship the previous year, Jeffrey. Louisville did not even sniff anywhere close to that. Because of the
fact Louisville's not in the Coastal. Okay, if Iowa was in the Big Ten East, they'd be just like Louisville.
Yep.
Let me ask you, Jeffrey, how can you compare Iowa to Louisville? We're not on the same spectrum. Iowa's probably a better team than we are.
It's the same thing.
No, you guys are the exact same.
Roughly.
Iowa went to the Big Ten Championship last year.
They're in the West.
We
they had an easy schedule, and they barely beat the teams that were garbage in the West. I mean, it's simple as that. They weren't that good. That's all I'm saying. I know you're going to disagree with me forever, so I'll stop talking about it. But it's just my point. Louisville and Iowa, it's about the same. Just Louisville's in Clemson's division, and Iowa's not in Ohio State, Michigan's division. It's almost the same thing. Thank you, Edward.
Thank you, Zethus.
Wow.
Any more questions for me?
No.
The rest of your list is good. I mean, it's really good.
Here we go. So at number 10 for me, I have West Virginia. And the reason that I do have West Virginia on the list is because over the summer, I was on Golden Blue Dude a lot. And he pretty much convinced everyone that the floor for West Virginia was 8-4 going into the year. And the ceiling was 10-2. And I was drinking the Kool-Aid, man. I was drinking that JT Daniels Kool-Aid. I was drinking the Kool-Aid that WVU was going to
That's
be
where
a
your mistake started.
12 contender, and I was wrong, man. He lied to me. I feel betrayed by Chris. At number 9, I have Nebraska, and the reason I have Nebraska, I know they've been terrible for a long time, but the reason I had hope for the Huskers is that they brought in Casey Thompson, and I thought that he would improve their offense significantly, and it was a lot better. But this year, their defense completely fell apart. I know. Oh my god! Sorry, I'm reading the comments. I'm just going to focus on the slides and then I'll look at the comments. But so yeah, the reason I had Nebraska at 9 is because I thought they could win the West. I mean, pretty much anyone can win the Big Ten West. So I thought they would at least win the Big Ten West, or at least compete to it with the last week. But their defense was so bad that it knocked them out of a bowl game. And also Scott Frost being a dummy and onside kicking against Northwestern didn't help them at all. And at 8, I have Wake Forest. Wake Forest won the Atlantic last year, and they brought pretty much their whole team back, although Sam Hartman was hurt at the beginning of the year. And then it started well for Wake. They almost beat Clemson. They beat Florida State, who turned out to be the second best team in the ACC. But then everything fell apart for Wake, and they only finished 7-5. And I was just very disappointed in them down the stretch. I was trying to hype them up as a team that could even compete for a playoff spot after that loss to Clemson, but they did not, and they finished 7-5. And Austin's team destroyed them, didn't they, Austin?
Yep, 8 turnovers.
Mm-hmm. And at number 7, I have NC State, another team that did very well and almost won the ACC Atlantic last year. And they brought back Devin Leary, who I thought was going to have a great season. And it was going really well for the Pack. But after that Clemson loss, they kind of just fell apart. I felt like that was their whole season for them, that game. Looking at it, they put everything into that game. And they came up short to the Taters. And then they beat Florida State as well. But after the Florida State win, it just fell apart for NC State, and they faded down the stretch. Although they did beat UNC, but even with that win, their season to me is still very disappointing. At number 6, I have Michigan State. Michigan State, I knew they weren't going to be as good as they were last year because they lost Kenneth Walker. And look what he's doing for the Seahawks. The guy's a star. But I thought that they would shore up the secondary, and their running game would take a bit of a drop. But I thought with that secondary being a bit better, I thought they could not contend for the East, but at least be the best of the rest and go 9-3, only losing to Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. That certainly did not happen, as their secondary was still just as bad as last year, and their offense is significantly worse without Kenneth Walker. And they went 5-7 and missed the bowl. A complete failure for Sparty. At number 5, I have Arkansas. I thought Arkansas would have a chance of winning the West this year with the way that with their game at Alabama being at home, and I thought they might be able to run the table or at least only drop one game. But their whole season fell apart after a field goal clanked the upright against the Aggies. And after that, they just went. It just felt like they had loss after loss after loss, including losing to Liberty, who really, in Hugh Freeze's last big win. It just felt like that they were a tier below everyone else in the SEC West this year. Although they did make a bowl, going 6-6. They lost their last rivalry game against Missouri, which really just put a damper on the whole season. And I'm going to have some questions for Sam Pittman going into the next season. At number 4, I have the Baylor Bears, or the Bear Necessities, as we like to call them here on Young Guns. I have a man crush on Dave Aranda. I love the guy. I think he's a great coach, similar to Marcus Freeman, although he's not the coach of my team, so it's not. We don't have as close of a connection. But I thought the bare necessities would at least make the Big 12 title game. I thought they might lose to Oklahoma, who I have coming up at number 3. But yeah, but everything went bad once they lost to BYU. I know Provo's a tough place to play, but that BYU team wasn't that great either, and I felt like they blew it at the end. They had a chance to win in overtime after, I believe, BYU missed a kick in that forced overtime. So I'm like, all right, they're going to win this game, and they didn't win that game. And then they got embarrassed at home by Oklahoma State, which really, that team wasn't that much better than them. And then I still picked Baylor in our weekly pick'em, and they screwed me. They screwed me over a couple of times, including games against Texas, TCU, and Kansas State. Overall, I do think that Dave Aranda is going to help make this team bounce back. I have more confidence in him than I do Sam Pittman or Mel Tucker. But it's still an extremely disappointing season for Baylor. And who knows, they could have a losing season if they lose to Air Force in the Armed Forces Bowl. And we're going to have a preview of that game tomorrow with Paul Catalina of 365 Sports. So keep it locked. At number 3, we have Boomer Sooner. As a blue blood, going 6-6 is absolutely unacceptable. Even though if you have a new coach, the worst that you should do is aim for. And they went 6-6. I know they lost a lot of talent, but the Big 12, all you really got to do is have a decent offense, and you're going to make a bowl. In their offense, and they did, but they should at least competed with everyone that they had. They should at least went 7-5, and they went 6-6. I thought they were going to be good after killing Nebraska, but I felt like any team probably could have blown out Nebraska with Scott Frost just leaving. What really put them on this list high for me, though, was their rivalry game against Texas. They got absolutely destroyed in the worst ever Red River loss ever. They did have a couple of wins, including Kansas and and Oklahoma State, but losing to a terrible West Virginia team and losing and pretty much getting embarrassed by TCU and Kansas State. Like, this just isn't the same Oklahoma program that Bob Stoops and Lincoln Riley had. And I thought they would have at least some of that life still in them. And we've talked about number 1 and number 2 enough. Those teams. There's a reason Mark calls Miami the joke of college football, because they are a joke right now. And Mario might make them a bit of a better. Mario might improve them with their recruits, but are those guys even going to stay there if things continue going south? Because those guys could all go to the portal. And of course, Texas A&M, it's just a dumpster fire with Jimbo. Who knows when that'll get any better. And at 1A, I have my Fighting Irish of Notre Dame de luck. Now, I know this was a new Marcus Freeman's first year, but we lost to Marshall and we lost to Stanford. Completely humiliating, embarrassing losses that a team with the talent of Notre Dame should never have.
So let me get this straight. You you have a team at 1A who went 8-4, but that's worse for you than a team going 6-6. You're both blue bloods and in the same situation.
Well, we didn't lose anybody, and Oklahoma did. And this is the last year of the greatest tight end to ever play at Notre Dame, Michael Mayer. This is his last year, and we wasted it. We're not even making it to the playoff. And also one of our greatest ever defensive linemen, Isaiah Foskey, who has the most sacks in school history. We wasted their last year at Notre Dame going 8-4.
I mean, if you beat Marshall and Stanford, you go 10-2, but it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. And losing, I know USC was good. Like, I know the Trojans had a good year, but losing to USC in Lincoln Riley's first year and Marcus Freeman's first year, and losing control of that rivalry, that just really bakes the cake for that. This is just a rough year for the Irish. We beat Clemson, and also I felt like we could have beaten Ohio State. Like that was a winnable game. We were winning at half.
I will say, Will, you also had a close call with California.
I know.
That was another. That was kind of disappointing.
Yeah. So yeah, any questions?
I already kind of harped on it earlier with Nebraska. Though I had them in the honorable mentions, I didn't have them in the top 10. You kind of already, pointed out how they've been bad for a few years, but still it was disappointing. I mean, to me, Nebraska's got to improve, for me to raise the standards. Kind of like how when we do these other teams, it's like what you've done recently versus what you have done this year is how I base disappointment. And Nebraska's been disappointing for 4, 5, 6 years now. So this isn't really a disappointment for them at this point because they keep doing it. So until they get better and then they have another season like this, then that would be disappointing. But I understand why you have them on there because it's still Nebraska, but that's just the way I see it with them.
I mean, my standard for them was to make a bowl. They didn't even make a bowl. I
understand that. In West Virginia, again, they underperform, but yeah, that gold and blue dude, man. When your favorite team is a team, man, and it's West Virginia, of course you're gonna think they're gonna be 8-4 at worst. I mean, 8-4 to me was their ceiling. I mean, I had them in the honorable mentions as well, but I don't know if it was necessarily a big disappointment. I mean, and then on NC State and Wake Forest, both they had some issues with quarterback injuries, and to me, that's why I didn't have them in the disappointments, because if they had healthy quarterbacks and they had the seasons that they had, then I would have had them in the top 10.
The reason that I made this disappointment list, I didn't factor that in. I only factored in how I thought preseason expectations for me. That's what I did this list on. I didn't do it based on injury. I didn't take that into consideration.
Oh, I did. I mean, maybe I shouldn't have, but that's just the way I did. I took everything into consideration. That's why I rank them differently, because if you're going off that, then sure, they both belong in the top 10, but they would have had better seasons with their quarterbacks being healthy. So since things out of their control happened, then that's why I didn't put them in the top 10, because it's not their fault.
I mean, yeah, it's okay we did different ways, but
but it makes sense. You're good.
So
that's all I got.
One question I have, Will, why do you have Michigan State at 6 and not in, like, say, the top 5 at least?
The top 5? Yeah. Well, I didn't think Michigan State could compete for a conference championship this year with their loss of Kenneth Walker. I did think that Arkansas could compete for the West just because they brought everyone back and they had a great 10-win season last year.
Yeah.
Baylor, I felt like they would have enough back. Oklahoma, they're blue blood. They kind of choked it away last year.
Yeah. Yeah, I had Oklahoma a little lower. I was just kind of like cutting them slack a little bit because it's like it's Coach first year.
Yeah, but like the blowout loss to Texas really, and losing to West Virginia the first time
And it's funny. This year was the first time since 1965 that Oklahoma got shut out by Texas. Like, wow.
In their defense, though, Dylan Gabriel did not play in that game, but they still probably would have lost because their defense was that bad, but they wouldn't have been blanked. They would have they'd put points up.
Wasn't me.
Yeah, Hummus Hero said, if you go by preseason polls, Sparty is up there with Texas A&M. That's why I went with Michigan State in my top 3. Because they were one.
Mike, yeah. Nothing really, Will. I'm just proud of you that you were hard on your Irish, that you didn't take it easy. because I figured you would have put Notre Dame on the most surprising list, which we'll get to here in a minute.
The reason why I don't have
But-
Kentucky in the top 10 list, Edward, is because to me, I still don't think Kentucky's a perennial power. They've had some good seasons, but they're still an 8-win team, and they didn't really vastly underperform that. Even if they were projected to go 10-2, I never thought they were. So in my opinion, they're not a disappointment, but to media, they are.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Jeffrey. Like Kentucky, I know they were projected to do all these big things and projected to compete with Georgia. I had Kentucky going 9-3. So if that tells you anything.
Yeah, again, Kentucky to me is kind of like Iowa. They're just very consistent 8-4 right now. They're not. They have one team that they always lose to in the East, and it's Georgia. And now that the conference on the East side is starting to get a little bit better with Tennessee being improved, and there's a little bit more competition on that side. I mean, Kentucky's never been a fantastic team, even recently when they've won 9 or 10 games, because that side of the division is weaker as well. The other teams like Tennessee have been awful lately, so they've been able to beat those kind of teams. To me, I don't look at Kentucky like I look at other teams that were disappointments that had underwhelming seasons. They didn't vastly underperform my expectations for them. I thought they were going to go 8-4, and they went 7-5. So that's not really a disappointment for me. Even though you lost to Vanderbilt, I get that argument, but Vanderbilt is better. They're still not good, but still, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That will never go away, Jackson.
Man, everybody's taking shots tonight for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Clint knows because it's the background on the StreamYard. You got the fancy looking house. That's why he says it's the same piano.
Yeah.
Their noise.
But yeah, no
All right,
more questions
are we
on
ready
mine.
to... Oh, okay. Wait, any questions from you, Buckeye Mike, or we ready? We're ready to go.
Yep.
One more thing, I do like old Baloo. He's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
He's happy.
I'm curious to see Buckeye Mike's, because Buckeye Mike seems like a guy who has high expectations for a lot of teams. So his ought to be really interesting.
Okay. I gotta find yours on here, Buckeye Mike.
Oh yeah,
Should be
one more
right
thing.
after
I
yours.
noticed that the A&M guy is conducting some music or something.
Okay, you're the last slide.
Hope it's the right one.
Buckeye
Okay.
Mike, the chat's already going after you. They're saying Ohio State should be number 1.
Here we go. Okay. Wait, no, it's surprising.
No, it's surprising. No,
I'm sorry. This list was confusing.
you're ruining it again.
Nobody
I
saw
don't know why the
nothing.
slides are being like this.
I don't know, man. Go back up. There you go.
No.
Okay.
Wait,
There's
what?
Buckeye Mike.
That's
This is
surprising.
surprising
You guys
twice.
are up. You passed it.
Will, move it. Hurry, quick.
Right there.
Okay, my bad.
Okay. 10 at Notre Dame. I'm not going to get into that. Everybody's demolished that. You suck. That's why you're 10. Florida at 9. Florida at 9. As he is, for whatever reason, nicknamed at Florida, AR-15 is just not the guy. That's proven. That is his nickname. I read that somewhere.
He's
That's
not
his nickname.
firing on all cylinders.
No.
BYU at number 8. Yes. They did have that amazing New Mexico Bowl win over
SMU.
SMU. Can't even think straight now. But other than that, I mean, your season was disappointing because I feel like you were expected to win just a little bit more. Things just didn't roll your way. The blowout to Oregon did not help. I had a feeling that with new quarterback and it only being week 2 or week 3 that you should have won, but you just let them get into too much of a rhythm. Oklahoma State at 7. You're coming off a Fiesta Bowl. Yes, you lost to DC and you lost some players, but there was enough there that you should have been able to make another run and at least get close to a New Year's 6. You went down the downhill on the roller coaster, so to speak.
It all
Arkansas.
started with Kansas.
Arkansas is right where they should be because last year I think they went 9-4,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. So they're roughly about where they should be. Love Dave Aranda, but Baylor at 5. I mean, again, Oklahoma State. You went to the Big 12 championship last year. You should. Whatever. You should have. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. You should have. Okay. You should have been able to keep the same level of hype going. You should have been able to smooth it out, stay level, because you had everything in your favor. Texas was iffy to start the year. OU was down. They stink like sewer water. Wisconsin at 4. Wisconsin is usually expected to win 10, 11 games and win the West most of the time. But that didn't happen. And it's a good thing you got who you got, because coming in, Luke Fickle ain't going to take the crap of the season you guys had. Michigan State, I mean, you're coming off an 11-2 year, and you lost one player. Your offense was built around one player, and then you see there what happens when you do that. That's not smart. Miami
sounds like Iowa with the offensive lineman.
Miami at 2 and A&M at 1. I'm not going to go into those because everybody's beating them down already.
I guess if you want my, questions on your top 10, I like it. I mean, the only one maybe that you could, for me, question, because I didn't have them in my top 10, was Oklahoma State, but I can see why. They were right on the outside of my top 10. The only reason why I didn't is because Oklahoma State's not perennially a top tier, like at the top of the Big 12. They're usually an 8-4 kind of team as well. So for me, basing it off history, Oklahoma State this isn't really a disappointing season for them. This is almost a normal season. And last year was the outlier, I guess you would say. That's why I didn't have them in my top 10, but I see why. But the rest of them are good. I mean, it all makes sense. Thanks, Edward.
No. I said, again, yes, the last 2 years, according to the crazy Ohio State fans, it is that. Logically speaking, it is this. It is a flat line because you're still winning consistent. Like, okay, it's this. If you're going from like 10 wins last year and you dip to 8 or 7 wins this year, then you're going down.
That's how I base my rankings, is on what these teams normally do. So if it's like you have a team and what they usually do is 9 wins and they win 5 or 6 games, that's disappointing. But if they win 7 or 8 and normally they usually win 9, it's not as much of a disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that brings my question to the table. Arkansas. Is Arkansas considered to be a 9-10 win team most of the time? First off.
I mean, they're kind of roller coastery, wishy-washy. But, I mean, since Sam Pittman came, it seems like, yeah.
That's a great point, because for me, it's like with the Dave Aranda and Baylor and Sam Pittman with Arkansas. For me, I feel that both of those coaches, the way that they have led those teams and how they've been going up, and then they suddenly just dropped. That's why I had them in the top 10. Because your point is correct, Austin, about they're usually lower historically, but lately they've done enough. Kind of like for me, Nebraska, how everybody has Nebraska mostly, or at least Will did, in the top 10, because historically they're higher, but they've been bad for a while. For me, just looking at Dave Aranda and Sam Pittman, this was a disappointing season for both of them, because I hold both of them in high regard as coaches. That I was surprised they did as bad as they did.
So it's kind of recency biased on that part
I
too.
go off historicalness, but it's also slight recency bias. It fluctuates, but it depends on the scenarios. Iowa, there's so much tape on them, 20 years of the same, whereas Arkansas has been at the bottom of the SEC, but they've improved under Sam Pittman, and then they dipped. So there's a difference.
Clint makes a perfect point. That's exactly roughly what it is. Because they have the high expectations, they just don't meet it. Now,
you've got a fan in Edward, Mike.
Yeah, I can't understand this chat, because then you have this junk. What I'm saying is, flatline. I'm talking about consistently. You're consistently winning 10, 11, 12 games. I don't mean flatline as like we're dead. We never are going to win another game. Flatline and consistency.
I think they know what you mean. They're just messing with you.
They're trying to tick me off. And I'm so tired it's working. Anyway.
No
questions. Just gonna ignore it. Anyway. Any other questions?
I'm good.
None for me. I like your top 10. Pretty good.
Yeah, I know, Zethus. I figured it. My sleepy butt figured it out.
Really, the only question I have for you,
yeah,
is that for me, like Wisconsin, like they're kind of like the other. Do you have them thought of higher than other Big Ten West teams? Because I kind of put all the Big Ten West teams in the same pile.
I mean, consistently, who comes out of the West? Yeah, Northwestern's had that little stretch of winning the West Division all the even years since 2018.
Wisconsin historically has been closer to being a great team than Iowa. Wisconsin's had their moments. Iowa really doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Because like when we played them last year, I'm like, okay, this is just like playing Purdue when Notre Dame played them last year. So that really lowered my regard of Wisconsin, the way we just beat them down like that. But
well, I mean, consistently, like, okay, if you look at the West on a regular basis, when you don't have these funky years like 18, 20, and last year and this year, who consistently came out of the West? Wisconsin went on like a 3 or 4 year stretch, like Ohio State did, of coming out of the West.
Okay.
I mean, on a regular, I guess to narrow it down to like one thing that makes the most sense, Wisconsin tends to usually be the more dominant team in the West. But yes, to Edward's point, the whole West is Purdue.
Purdue won it.
Yeah. And then they said, yeah, we can do better than Iowa. And they did.
I agree with your point, Troy. That's a great point of how they've had good seasons in the even years lately. But like you said, they have no talent, so they're just so overmatched.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, they were projected to win the West because they won the West in 18, they won the West in 20, and they were starting this weird, okay, we're not going to really give any effort and give a crap, and we're not going to win the division in the odd years, but we're going to give it our all and win the division in the even years. All right, I think we're ready for the next one.
All set.
Yep, now it's on to the most surprising teams of 2022.
Jeffrey, you're up.
You're up.
All right. So my honorable mentions for the surprising teams, I have USC because yes, they improved from 4-8 to 11-2, but again, they got so much talent, filtered in from Lincoln Riley through the transfer portal that really, only winning 7-8 games would have been a disappointment, I guess, considering how much talent they had, even though it was a first-year head coach. So they're in the honorable mention. They had a great season, but as much talent as they had, the turnaround was kind of expected. Illinois is in the honorable mentions because they've really turned it around. Brett Bielema is doing a great job at Illinois. I think that they're very close to being in the top 10, but for what he's done in the past as a head coach, you kind of expected it, especially with the Big Ten West being so unpredictable anyway. Almost any team can win it. Then for me, it's just they're not a top 10 most surprising. Maybe if they had have beaten Michigan, then they'd been in the top 10 for sure. But unfortunately, they fell just short. But yeah, they had a great season. Duke is in the honorable mentions. They really turned it around. I know it was Mike Elko's first season at head coach, and they went 8-4. But you look at who they played; they didn't really beat anybody. Their best win was Wake Forest. They beat all the bad teams in the ACC. So yes, massive turnaround because Duke usually can't do that. But they didn't really do anything that blew the socks off, and they were able to get some decent players in year one. I just think that overall, Duke didn't really have a massive leap. They definitely turned it around and they were a lot better, but I would just say that, especially with Mike Elk, we don't know how he's, going to coach at Duke. I mean, he could be, improve them even more. So I'll just say that there's other teams that are ahead of them that I couldn't really put Duke in the top 10, but they were surprised. Vanderbilt as well. If they had have made a bowl game, they probably would have been in the top 10, but they fell just short of that, but they definitely had their moments. Kansas State, they're an honorable mention. They had a great season, a lot better than a lot of people thought, but the Big 12 was down and had a lot of unpredictability to it, so that's why they're in the top 10. Not in the top 10, but outside the top 10. James Madison, they had a good season coming over from the FCS to the FBS. No one really knew what they were going to do. No one really thought maybe they'd do as well as they did, but they were a great FCS program, and they were in the Sun Belt, and they kind of did stumble a little bit later on in the season, but they still had a really good season in their first year as an FBS program. Florida State, they had a great season. They really turned it around, but they have a lot of talent. But I would just say that, again, kind of the USC thing, they have a lot of talent eventually. If Mike Norvell really is a good coach, and obviously he's starting to really show maybe that he can win, then again, Florida State, just not as much of a surprise with the amount of talent they have. UCLA, finally, Chip Kelly's starting to get them rolling. They've been steadily going up. They didn't take a massive lead this year. They were a lot better, but that Arizona loss kind of hurt, but they still had a great season. And South Carolina, they were slightly surprised as well, but they had a couple of interesting results that kind of hurt them from being in the top 10, but they're right on the outside. So for the top 10 most surprising teams, and I have a few teams that are, lower up here, which a lot of people be like, why didn't I put more Power 5? I just gave a little bit more love to teams that have been really awful lately, and they turned it around. But Oregon State is at number 10, and yes, they were an improving team as well. But Oregon State, they had some massive wins this year, And Jonathan Smith, what he's done at Oregon State, turning that program around and just going up. It's marvelous to see. And I have him at number 10. You really could have almost put almost any team in the honorable mentions. You could have put Duke, you could have put Illinois, you could have put USC, any team at number 10. But I just gave love to Oregon State because they've been bad for a long time and they've improved. Syracuse is at number 9, and some people would probably say, why is Duke not here, but Syracuse is, especially because Syracuse fell flat. But, I mean, Dino Babers looked like he was just completely toast, like he's going to get fired. His coaching job is over. Syracuse is in, the bottom of the AC. They're playing awful. They're playing worse than Duke was last year. But Syracuse was able to turn around and do some things. And once, Garrett Schrader got hurt and their season kind of derailed and he came back and wasn't the same. So if he hadn't got hurt, they might have had a better season. So that's why I have them in the top 10, because they did some really good things early on. Troy's at number 8. They were not a very good team last year. And John Summerall's first season as head coach, they went 12-2, won the Sun Belt. That's fantastic and deserves a lot of attention. South Alabama's at number 7. They were below 500 last year, and Kane Womack really turned them around. South Alabama's a really solid program, and they're newer to the FBS, so they deserve a lot of credit for that. Tennessee's at number 6, and I know that they lost to South Carolina, and that kind of derailed it a little bit, but still, no one thought maybe Tennessee would be this good. Hendon Hooker had a great season, and they beat Alabama, and they beat LSU on the road by 27. They had a fantastic season. It got a little bit downgraded at the end, but still very surprising. UConn's at number 5, and I know they ended the season 6-7, but UConn was just awful last year. The worst team in the FBS. Maybe they might not deserve to be number 5, but if you take into consideration how bad they were, then they should be in the top 10. And just to give them credit for what they did. Kansas is number 4, and I know some people are like, well, Kansas started the season out well, but then they fell apart. But again, Kansas was that bad. The reason why I don't have Duke is because Duke is not – they were not as bad as Kansas and Syracuse were last year, because Duke could be in the top 10. I'm sure one of you guys probably does, maybe. But again, Duke, very surprising. But Kansas was so awful last year. And Lance Leopold, to be able to get them to be playing confident football. And again, same with Syracuse, an injury at quarterback. Jalen Daniels got hurt, and Jason Bean's a solid quarterback, but he's not Jalen Daniels. Kansas had a higher ceiling when he was in, and they were playing better, just like Garrett Schrader at Syracuse. So I took injuries into account for why they were more surprising, because when their starting quarterbacks were in, they were even better than what they ended up as. Washington's at number 3 because they were 4-8, and then you get Michael Penix and you just turn it around and you go 10-2. I thought preseason they go 8-4, and a lot of people thought I was crazy. I did have an advantage point of watching Indiana a lot and seeing how good he was, that I was like, hey, if he can stay healthy, Washington is going to turn it around. But I didn't know they were going to go 10-2. If they hadn't lost to Arizona State, who knows how high they'd be on this list. It could be 2 or number 1. But Washington had a great season, and they really turned it around. They didn't have as much talent as USC, because, again, USC, great turnaround as well, but different circumstances. Number 2 is Tulane. Last year they went 2-10. This year, everybody knows what they did. Fantastic season for them. I mean, I know I kind of downgraded Tulane a bit every time Jackson brought it up, because I was like, well, yeah, they were 2-10 last year, but there was a hurricane. Michael Pratt got hurt. Almost the whole team was hurt. They almost beat Oklahoma last year when everything was going good and the hurricane hadn't happened, injuries hadn't happened. So maybe they would have gone 6-6 last year, 7-5, and they wouldn't have been as big of a surprise this year. But still, with everything that happened last year, Willie Fritz was able to keep the team together, and they were able to have a massive turnaround. It was a great season for Tulane. And again, at number 1, I have TCU, and what really needs to be said, TCU, they found ways to win. Do I think TCU is a top 4 team? No. Do they have top 4 talent? No. But they found ways to win. They made the college football playoff. They only have 1 loss to a top 10 team on a neutral field. They had a fantastic season, and nobody thought TCU would make the playoff, obviously. And again, they're probably, out of all the teams, they're the worst of the 4 teams in the college football playoff talent-wise, but they deserve to be there. They had a great season, and credit to their first-year head coach for getting the job done.
Well,
Okay, anyone have questions for Jeffrey?
yeah, I have a question about your top 10 surprising teams. What made you feel that Syracuse was on your top 10 surprise teams?
because last year they were awful. They were worse than Duke. I basically explained it when I went through it that the only reason why I had Syracuse instead of Duke is because of the fact that Syracuse had an injury to their quarterback as well. They were awful last year, and at the beginning of the season, they looked really solid, and then Garrett Schrader went down, and then it all fell apart. And even when he came back, it wasn't the same. So, again, who knows what they would have done if he hadn't gotten hurt. Same with Jalen Daniels with Kansas. You know, they were playing a lot better before he got hurt. And both Kansas and Syracuse were way worse than Duke was the prior year. But I know what you mean. Duke could definitely be in the top 10. There's just so many to pick from, but that's just why I put Syracuse in the top 10.
That's all questions I got.
Yeah, I got
None
one.
on my behalf.
Why UConn?
Because they were the worst FBS program last year. Again, that's why I said maybe I shouldn't have them as high, but I just gave them a lot of credit because they were that bad. They were awful. They couldn't score on anybody. They were one of the worst programs ever in history. I mean, maybe not in history, but they were that bad. And they just turned it around and go 6-6. Even though, again, I was on here last show and I said that UConn could have been 4-8 if, you know, Jake Hayner hadn't got hurt for Fresno State. They wouldn't have won that game. And then with the Liberty game, Hugh Freeze was, you know, rumored to go to Auburn, and Liberty didn't have their heads in the game, and UConn won that game too. But still, it was a massive turnaround. I just gave them a little bit more credit than I probably should have, but still a great turnaround for UConn.
I mean, it's a great list, but I mean, so because the other thing too is Duke not on there too because Kansas the head-to-head?
No, I said I didn't have Duke because Duke wasn't as bad as Syracuse and Kansas were last year.
I
And they
think
didn't really have any injury problems, and they beat a lot of terrible teams. And it's not the fact that they're not improving. Mike Elko did a great job, but still, there are a lot of circumstances. I took injuries into account, and also what you were last year, how bad you were.
I'm gonna disagree with you on one thing, Jeffrey. I know this is trivial, but Syracuse was 5-7 last year, and Duke was 3-9.
Okay, I
So
mean,
I
I
thought
get it. I just felt Syracuse was worse, but you mean, you got a point.
Yeah.
The Dukes.
Well, I guess that's all the questions from everybody for Jeffrey, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Unless
Onward to the next.
onward to Jackson's.
Well, before we get to my top 10, here are a few honorable mentions. LSU, Florida State, James Madison, Troy, Vanderbilt, Arizona, South Carolina, North Carolina. I mean, the way South Carolina ended their season, like, I was just tempted to put them on my top 10, but I didn't. I did think about putting North Carolina on there, but I mean, the ACC Coastal is easy to win. So there you go. Arizona, they go from 1 win to 5 wins. That was a bit of a surprise right there, but, you know, is what it is. So no top 10 for you, Arizona. Sorry. Vanderbilt, you know, the way they beat Kentucky and Florida, and had they beaten Tennessee, they would be in the top 10 instead of Tennessee. So there you go. But great job, Clark Lee. You're doing a great job at Vanderbilt. Troy, you know, going from 4-8 to just having more wins than Alabama in the first year of John Sumrall, that's pretty big right there. But unfortunately, there are some teams that were more surprising than you, Troy. James Madison, you've done a fantastic job in your first year as an FBS team. Did think about putting you on my top 10, but unfortunately, there's no room for you. Florida State, your schedule got gradually easier as it went along. So there you go. LSU, had you not lost to Texas A&M, you would be in the top 10. So, but as we start, but I digress. I start off with Tennessee at 10. Now, I did not expect them to, yeah, I know, right? LS who? Yeah, Troy V agrees. Yeah, Tennessee, I did not expect them to compete for the SEC East. I didn't even expect them to compete for the SEC, but they did, and they were really awesome this year until the Hendon Hooker injury happened. So there you go. Washington, I was really surprised, because I expect them to make a bowl game. I didn't expect them to, have their primetime moments like against Michigan State and Oregon. That was unexpected for me right there. But Kansas State, they go from a 7-win team to winning the Big 12 title. That in and of itself is very surprising. That was a big surprise to me. I was super impressed with Kansas State. Illinois, I did not think they would be contending for the Big Ten West, but they did. So, and that 8-win season, it was just magnificently impressive. I was impressed with the way they basically beat up on Wisconsin in their own backyard. So Brett Bielema winning in his first return to Wisconsin as not the Wisconsin head coach. That was pretty big. Oregon State, I did not expect them to get to the top 15, so I was really surprised by them, but great year to Oregon State. I'm impressed with you boys, especially getting your first win against an SEC team in school history in the Las Vegas Bowl last Saturday. And Kansas, I expected you to win a few games you shouldn't. I didn't want you to, end your your non-bowl eligibility streak, and that was enough for me to put you in my top 5 right there. Duke, you went from 3-9 to 8-4. Congratulations to Coach Mike Elko. I'm impressed with the job he's done this year. Maybe he can make that into a 9-win season, triple that win total. That would be pretty big right there. Connecticut, man. I mean, there was nowhere to go but up. Good Lord. This is one, I haven't seen a team of Connecticut this good since 2010 and 2009 with Randy Edsall. That was pretty big. Go from 1-11 to 6-6. Wow. I mean, it was like Jeffrey put it, had it been for Fresno having Jake Hayner and Hugh Freeze not focusing on the Auburn job, they'd be 4-8. But hey, you go from 1-11 to a 6-7 year. I mean, that is impressive in and of itself. Tulane, oh man, they were expected to finish 7th in the American Athletic Conference in the preseason. Yeah, it was wow. I'm impressed with Tulane with the job they've done, and maybe they could get to that 12th win in the Cotton Bowl. That'd be pretty sweet, right? So congratulations, Tulane, on surprising everybody. And TCU, number 1. I knew they were going to surprise everybody. So, I'm impressed with TCU. So, anybody got questions, comments, concerns?
Edward's got a question for you.
If Meat Chicken was such a Meat Chicken State was a disappointment, how's that going to win? Meat Chicken.
Michigan State.
Oh, Michigan State?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Oh, man, I am super tired. Oof. So, Michigan State was disappointment. Well, you go from the top 15 to not even making it to a bowl game. That's a disappointment in of itself.
Is he talking about when you reference Washington?
Yeah.
You said it
He's
was a good
saying,
win.
yeah,
And
he's saying if Michigan State was such a disappointment, how can it be a good win for
Well, it was a
Washington?
good win at the time because, Michigan State, was ranked and Washington was unranked. So that was a great win. I mean, that was just unexpected. I'm super impressed with the job that Washington has done. I hope
I think the point he's getting at, though, Jackson, to help you understand, is we've seen what Michigan State is now, though. Michigan State is not very good. So that win doesn't look as good as it once did.
Right.
Yeah, but it still counts. That's what everybody doesn't like to remember. It still counts. And it's
I understand it.
if we're looking at it from the committee's point of view, it's what was it when it happened? It's not always what was it or what is it now. It's what was it when it happened.
Right. Any questions?
well, that's
on
why
my top-
early season rankings shouldn't exist, though, because of the fact when you hold a team in high regard and they end up not being good, they should have never been highly regarded in the first place. That's why a lot of people argue that you should have rankings after like week 5, so you can actually tell who's good and rank them accordingly, so you'll never think that was a great win to begin with.
Well, that's why the whole reason, and sorry to go on this rant, but the whole reason that we have the preseason rankings and the AP rankings that we go off of until the CFP rankings come out is because they're all rankings that, honestly, for anybody who doesn't understand it, they don't matter. The CFP rankings are the ones that matter. So this whole time, yeah, you could be ranked number 1 and make it all the way through. It doesn't matter until the CFP rankings come out.
True. Any questions about my top 10?
Why Tennessee so low?
Well, because they were somewhat expected to, surprise some teams, because of this year alone. But I think the Hendon Hooker injury, kind of factored into that. So if they were like 11-1, for example, or like won the East Division, they'd be a little higher than 10.
Makes sense.
Jeffrey?
I mean, I don't really have any quibbles with your top 10. I mean, Illinois, like I said, I didn't have in the top 10 because of the fact that, I mean, I thought they would make a bowl game, and they overperformed a little bit. And Brett Bielema has had great success as a head coach, so it's not too much of a shock. Duke's the only one everyone's talking about. I mean, again, I could have had Duke in the top 10. They're right outside. And arguably with what Will brought up with them being 3-9, I just felt that Syracuse was awful, even though they went 5-7, and it was big for them to break out of it, make a bowl with Dino Babers and everything. And plus, again, if Garrett Schrader did not go down, they could have been 9-3. So I took injuries into account. Duke is solid; they really improved. Mike Elko did a great job, but man, that schedule was awful. And I know Syracuse doesn't play too much either, but just the teams Duke beat were all of the worst teams in the ACC. And plus, Duke was, I know Syracuse had that good season in 2019 with Eric Dungy, but Duke, they were good a few years ago with Daniel Jones, and, they've had some solid seasons lately. So even though they went down, I kind of feel that there was a bit better foundation left by David Cutcliffe for the rise to not be as big either. There were a lot of factors. I mean, of all the teams I didn't have in the top 10, Duke would be the first one I would put in it. So I'll just say that.
Right.
Cool. So why is UConn in such high regard? I mean, they're literally a 6-7 team, barely qualified for a bowl game.
Because of the job that Jim Mora has done. I'm just like super impressed with them. I mean, what a big turnaround! 1-11. You go from a 1-win team to a 6-win team, and I can't think of the last time they've had a 6-win year. So, wow.
The great Bob Diaco was the last coach to get them to 6 wins.
Yep. That's why.
Gotcha. I mean, to your I think it was your point talking about 09 to 11. There was one bowl game in there that they played Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl, and
Yeah.
a lot of people said that they had no business being there.
Yeah, that's true. Austin, any questions?
Nope, I'm good.
What about you, Will?
One question for you, Jackson.
Okay.
So Kansas State went 11-2, correct? They went
This
11-2.
year,
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And they're only in TCU went 12-1. So why do you have Kansas State so much lower than TCU?
I thought Kansas State had 3 losses.
Okay, they might.
Yeah, they're like a
well,
10-3. Still impressive though.
yeah. Well, because nobody really expected TCU to make it to the playoffs in the preseason, right? I mean, like, nobody's really talking about this, but like Matt Duggan was having to fight for the quarterback position, the starting quarterback gig.
Well, Hamas Hero said that gold and blue guy said TCU would go 3-9, and West Virginia would go 10-2. So I mean, and then I responded with, I would have never said that. Hamas Hero, that's too funny, man.
Yeah, and Kansas State, as I recollect, they were just going to be like another 8-win team, right? Or 4-win team, something like that in the not 4 wins, excuse me. I'm a little tired. A 7-8 win team, like they have been last few years. But then they surprise everyone and win the Big 12 this year. That was just super big. I like the job that they've done this year. But, I was more impressed with Duke and Connecticut. Like, it has nothing to do with Kansas State. But to tell you the truth, I was impressed with Tulane, team that beat Kansas State in week 3, by the way. And I was really impressed with Connecticut, Duke, and Kansas, because, I mean, let's be real. Nobody had Kansas going to a bowl game. And
Man, they will never stop with that. Oh, man.
But Illinois, I was more impressed with Illinois than I was with Kansas State. I was impressed with Oregon State way more than I was with Kansas State. So, Will, it had nothing to do with Kansas State by themselves. It had more to do with the other teams, to be honest.
Okay, cool. I mean, I did the same thing, but I wanted to hear what you had to say about it.
All right. I guess.
Yeah, okay, believe it when we see it.
No worries, man. You're all good.
Any other questions for Jackson?
I don't think so. Only other thing I would say is, for Connor's sake, I don't think that the Oregon State logo is big enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that thing's tiny, man. Look how big the Kansas State is compared to the Oregon State one.
Yeah.
All right, Austin, your turn, buddy.
Cool. Let's get this party going. So at number 10, I have Illinois. Brett Bielema did a fantastic job this year turning Illinois around. They were a team that was not very good last year. And the fact that, yes, the record states they are 7-5, But to start the season off 7-1 and only lose to Michigan by 2 on a last-second field goal, like, that's very improved in my book, because other Illinois teams wouldn't have even played Michigan that close. And the fact that Britt Bielema got them to 7-1, yes, they did fall off towards the end. I get that. But the fact that he took an Illinois team 7-1 that was nowhere near 7-1 in the first place to get them to that record and in the top college football playoff rankings the first week, that's a big success, big surprise for me. I didn't think they would be this good this quick. And then Florida State at number 9. Florida State, they've been the team that's been up and down a lot. And for this year, for them to finally put it together and get 9 wins, that's a little surprising. I wasn't expecting them to make that big of a jump so quick. Jordan Travis, that dude can ball. And Florida State's finally putting it together. They dominated Syracuse. They dominated the preseason national champion, the Miami Hurricanes. They gave Clemson a run for their money. They beat Louisville by 4 in the Ville. I know that sounds homerish, but that's still a good win. Florida State has just been very impressive the way they've been able to put it together and not be inconsistent. 5 wins, 6 wins, 3 wins. The fact that they got to 9 so quick after the roller coaster of emotions, I think that's a big surprise to me. Tulane, from going 2-10 to winning the American Championship, that is a big jump and improvement. That's a big jump. And the reason why I have them so low compared to the other 2 fellows above me is because, that I took injuries into factor, that if maybe Tulane didn't have all those injuries, who knows, they may be better than 2-10. But the fact that they won the American this year was kind of surprising because I had Cincinnati in the preseason winning it. But that's a big jump to win the American and to beat Cincinnati to get there and then beat UCF in the title game. That's a really big surprise to me. Oregon State, a team that gave USC everything they had, and it fell just short at the end. And Oregon State, as the other guys have said, hasn't been very good. But Jonathan Smith has turned them around really, really quick. This year, their first 10-win season in quite a while. And the fact that they got to 10 wins this year was surprising to me because I thought Oregon State, their baseline would have been 8 wins. I've been like, okay, anything above 8 wins, you're kind of dreaming. But the fact that they got 10 wins and the way they came back against Oregon, and then that's just surprising and impressive all in one. Like, Oregon State proved that they're here and they're for real. And number 6, Tennessee, the team that Alabama basically was their cupcake game in the SEC, was like, Tennessee, But this year, Tennessee finally got the dragon off their back. They finally slayed the dragon. And not to mention that Hendon Hooker, what a Heisman candidate season he had. The fact that they finally beat Bama, they went to LSU, they slapped them around, and the fact that Tennessee was 2 spots away from making the college football playoffs after going 5-7, I do believe, the previous year. That's surprising to make that big of a jump in the second year. Josh Heupel, what an impressive job you have of turning that Volunteers program around. Like, great job, and that's something Tennessee fans can be proud of. USC, the USC Trojans, Lincoln Riley, his first year, took a 4-8 team that Clay Helton was originally the coach at. Lincoln Riley took a 4-8 USC program, got him to their first Pac-12 title game since 2020, the COVID year, and the fact that he got them to 11-2, and they were one stop away from being 12-1 possibly and in the college football playoffs. The fact that Lincoln Riley took a 4-8 team to 11 wins in year one, like, come on. How can you not put USC in the top 5 with that? That's incredible. Yes, you could say, oh, they have Caleb Williams. They have all these superstars. But the fact that Lincoln Riley took almost a pile of garbage and turned it into gold, come on. And USC, I mean, yes, great season. That's surprising that he was able to turn that program into a perennial playoff team. Almost Pac-12 champions again. North Carolina, they were another one that I believe was 3-9, 4-8 last year. And overall as a baseline, North Carolina has not been very good. They've been kind of the team that you beat up on in the ACC. And Drake May got this team to 9 wins this year. Like, that is really, really surprising for me that they made that big of a leap in year one. And with that defense, and he was still to overcome that, that's really surprising to me. And the fact that North Carolina is playing Oregon for a big-time bowl, that's really impressive that they've jumped this fast. And then Kansas and UConn at 3-2. I know we've done beat this horse to death, but Kansas and UConn are a basketball school. And the fact that they are bowl eligible, both of them, and the fact that they won 6 games is a miracle in its own right. Because if someone were to tell you that these two teams would have 6 wins, you would ask them, are you crazy? Where's your head at? And the fact that 2 basketball schools have 6 wins that don't care about their football programs, and that is a surprising big jump to me, that they're both 6-6 or 6-7 in UConn's case, if you count the bowl loss. That is just beyond amazing. That a basketball school that both were dumpster fires with only 1 win each year's, and they were both able to put it together this year. Jim, that's just amazing in my book that they were able to do that. TCU at number 1 for all the obvious reasons. They were 5-7. No one even expected them to even sniff the playoff conversation. Nobody did. And they're 12-1. And if Max Duggan would have QB sneaked it, they would have had a perfect season going into the playoffs. But they didn't. But the fact that Sonny Dykes took a 5-7 program to 12-1 in 1 year, like, come on. And in the college football playoffs with a chance to win the whole darn thing, like, you can't tell me that that's not been the most surprising and impressive turnaround this year.
Are we ready for questions?
I guess I can start. North Carolina went 6-7.
Yeah, I was going to go on that too.
So they weren't that bad. I mean, in the year prior, they were really good. They just kind of dipped a bit last year. But I mean, I can see why they'd be a surprise. I mean, no one thought that Drake May was going to burst onto the scene the way he did. So, I mean, that makes sense. But, I mean, Carolina wasn't that bad last year. USC, again, I understand. I mean, they turned it around. But USC was not a pile of garbage last year. They had a lot of talent, but their coach was not very good. And they fired him early on, and then USC completely collapsed because they fired their coach at the beginning of the season. If Clay Helton had been the coach the whole season, they wouldn't have gone 4-8. They probably would have been like 6-6, 7-5. So USC was not a complete dumpster fire, as everyone likes to point out. So it wasn't this massive turnaround, as everyone's saying. Lincoln Riley brought all these players to USC. If you don't win 9-10 games with that kind of talent, then you're a garbage coach. I mean, it is what it is. And then on everything else, I have no issues with.
So, real quick, before anyone else says anything, I hate repeating myself and I hate repeating others, but Jeffrey is spot on. Tim is in the comments right now trying to hype up USC. Honestly, it shouldn't be on this list at all. It shouldn't. You literally plucked one coach and most of his coaching staff and a lot of his roster from one school. You're putting it at another school. Nothing is going to change. He might change the culture so that the whole locker room is in the agreement of the culture, but it does not change what produces on the field at all. It's the same. You bring in a coach who can't win a playoff game. Okay, whatever. The point is, no. The point is, you can't. My point is, it's not a surprise because guess what? Like Jeffrey said, Jeffrey was spot on with everything. You guys would have been, you know what? I'm done. Move on.
Okay, so I'm gonna just ask you about UNC Austin because I think it's
Go for it, Will.
I think it's good that you gave them that you like bigged them up, but like they lost to I don't know. For me, what really sticks out to them is that they lost to Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech. I mean, Brent Key did do a better job with the Jackets this year, but I don't know, man. Like I just don't think they're very good. And for the Tar Heels to lose to them, I don't know. It kind of ruins it for me a bit.
Okay, Will, so let me go a little in-depth explaining real quick. So the reason why UNC is here for me, yes, I get it. They had that bad loss to Georgia Tech. I get it. I understand if that's why they would stay out of yours. But the fact that they were playing for an ACC championship this early, like that they're playing for an ACC title, that's pretty huge for a North Carolina program who has consistently been on the wavelength of not being very good. That have been kind of the team you beat up on.
Well, they made a New Year's Six Bowl in 2020, so I don't know. Like in my opinion, this is just my opinion. I don't think they're really like a weak link in the ACC, and they're also ranked 10th going into 2021. So for me, I don't know. Like I understand why you have them up there, but for me, like I don't know. I wasn't that surprised about it. That's just my opinion.
Okay, and I get it, Will, and Will. It's a thing for me is how I base it off on is that you're saying North Carolina was 6-7, but the fact that they jumped from 6 to 9, I know that's only 3 wins different, but they also made the conference title game and they're playing in a major bowl this year too with it. Like that's a big jump, and Drake May. A lot of people believe he still should have been a Heisman candidate. That's another story for another day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other question, Jackson?
Yeah. I just have a question about what made you feel that USC was the top 5, one of the top 5 and most surprising teams, Austin.
Okay, so here's why I had USC here. I know the argument's being made that yes, Lincoln Riley, he plucked all this talent from his former team, brought him to USC, and of course they were going to win this many. No, you don't know that because the Pac-12 is loaded. Like, it is. The Pac-12 is loaded. Like, you have Oregon, you have Utah, UCLA was good this year. I mean, and the fact that USC overcame the gauntlet at their schedule and Caleb Williams was able to get them over that hump, like, that's impressive. And the fact that USC was 4-8 with literally nothing, and Lincoln Riley comes in and changes the culture of the team and puts them in 11 wins and takes them to a New Year's Six, and they're one play away in the Utah game in Salt Lake. If the 2-point conversions is no good, we're talking about USC in the playoffs. Like, that's impressive. Like, not many coaches could do that in year one.
Yeah, but here is the thing. If you look at the preseason polls, right, if you look at say the Phil Steele magazine. Guess who he had as his number one surprise team?
USC.
You know,
Well, it
and
still makes them a surprise. I'll give them this. The Trojans this.
yeah,
It does still make them a surprise. Like people thought they would be better, but it's still surprising that they're this good and that they're beating
yeah. I mean, I'm
many
not,
good Pac-12 teams.
yeah, but I mean, I like what USC has done.
I got a whole point here. Okay, I'm gonna shut this narrative about USC down. Tim's never gonna agree with me, and Buck I might, and that's fine because I mean it doesn't matter. Everybody's entitled to an opinion. But USC's recruiting class in 2021 was number 7 in the country. You're trying to tell me that's a dumpster fire? No.
Yeah.
It's not a dumpster fire. You have talent. The coach got fired early in the season. The team tanked. They gave up. They quit. They would have been better than 4-8, but they quit. And then you bring in the transfer portal. Tim said it was 2 players from Oklahoma. It was 3, but he brought in a 3-star linebacker from Utah, a 2-star defensive lineman from San Jose State, a 5-star wide receiver in Jordan Addison in the transfer portal rank. He was a 4-star out of college, but he was from Pitt, a 3-star corner out of Washington, a 3-star defensive line out of Wyoming, a 4-star linebacker out of Arizona State, 3-star safety out of Ohio State, 5-star quarterback out of Oklahoma, 3-star linebacker out of Alabama, a 3-star linebacker out of Auburn, a 4-star running back from Oregon, a 3-star running back from Stanford, a 4-star cornerback from Oklahoma, 3-star cornerback from Colorado, a 4-star wide receiver from Colorado, a 4-star wide receiver from Oklahoma, a 3-star defensive line from Kansas State, a 3-star wide receiver in Washington, a 3-star wide receiver from Virginia, or offensive tackle from Virginia, and a 3-star defensive line from TCU. Also in this recruiting class, he had in 2022 a 5-star, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 stars, and a couple 3 stars. And then the prior classes were all top 10 classes. Not a dumpster fire. Lincoln Riley brought in talent. It might not have been the elite. It might not have been the whole Oklahoma team, but you took the best 3 from Oklahoma. You took a lot of other players from the portal. You've already had a lot of players at USC that were already good to begin with. They finally played under a good coach, and you got it done. I mean, literally, it's right here. You had talent. You brought in the running back from Oregon. You brought in all these players. It was not as surprising as a lot of people made it out to be. Mark even said in the beginning of the preseason he thought they'd win 9 games. I mean, they went over that, but it still is not the biggest surprise in the world when you have one of the top 8 best rosters. And where do they finish in the AP poll? Below 8. So it's actually a disappointment if you're going off talent rankings. It's not justifiable.
I have an argument for this. I have an argument. Hold on. So if you're telling me you give Clay Helton this talent, what is you saw what he did. They were 4-8 for heaven's sakes. Lincoln Riley, who is an offensive mastermind, brought that offense. And yes, you could say what you want about the defense. The defense wasn't very good. Sure. But the offense, look at the steps it took. And the fact that they won 11 games, like, come on. What coach could do that in year 1? Like that.
Kalen DeBoer took Washington from 4-8 to 10-2 with Penix.
The thing that most impresses me about with the Trojans is, I'll say this: I think that changing of the culture was the most amazing thing. Like just how much, because culture matters.
Points out, undeveloped. USC had talent that was undeveloped. Lincoln Riley did a fantastic job, but they had talent on the team. They you could say they exceeded expectations. I mean, to me, if you're going off surprising teams, you got to give these smaller teams some love that haven't been good in forever, that have no talent. Does UConn have talent? They don't. USC has a lot of talent. It was a remarkable job by Lincoln Riley. But all me and Buck and Mike are saying is that it's not a complete surprise what they did. They have a lot of talent on the team. The talent is a top 10 team. It really, if USC finished 8-4, 9-3, it would have been a disappointment. And you can almost already put them on the disappointing list because they have so much talent. Tim, did UConn go 10-2 or 11-2? What does UConn have on their team? Can you name me a player on their team? Taquan Roberson from Penn State, he didn't even play most of the season at quarterback. They don't have talent. They've got nothing. USC has the best talent in the world. I like USC a lot, Tim. I'm just saying that it's not a biggest surprise in the world.
So to your point and to the point of the comment on screen is basically what I was trying to say. I couldn't gather my words, and I'm sorry. That was not very
Yeah, it wasn't
adult of me.
shocking.
That was I was trying to say that, and it just wouldn't come out for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
see, Tim's just not understanding the point. Was UConn 4-quarter away from going to the play? UConn will never go to the playoffs unless somehow college football is turned upside down. It's not comparable. You can't compare USC to UConn. UConn's a surprise because no one thought they'd win 6 games. If you said to at the preseason that USC can win 11 games, would that have been impossible? I would have said that it is possible that they can win 11 games. If you had said in the preseason UConn was going to win 6 games, I'd have said no. That's why it's a surprise. There's a difference. It's about comparable. You're comparing apples to oranges here. It's just not the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that I'm most impressed with Lincoln Riley about changing the culture of USC. Like, the culture at USC in 2021 was similar to what it is at A&M now. And that he was able to just turn that culture like this. Just like with the key thing. I think that's what makes, for me, that's what makes him like borderline top 10. Like, I kept them out of my top 10, but I just think the culture thing was the most important.
Hold on. So to Roger Dodger's point, what do you consider a dumpster fire? A dumpster fire is consistently winning 3-4 games a year.
They went 8-4, 9-3 a lot of the time under Clay Helton, and then they fired him at the beginning of the season, and that is why they went 4-8. If he was the head coach of that team, they do not go 4-8. They chose to fire him at the beginning of the season. They didn't have to, but they did. They chose to suck. They chose to go 4-8. I mean, they literally did. They actually would have sucked anyway compared to what they should be with Clay Helton. That's why he is fired. Lincoln Riley is way better than Clay Helton, but still, to say they're a dumpster fire is not true.
So
if they were a dumpster fire, then they would not have been able to turn it around to be almost a playoff team. That's why they're not a dumpster fire, because they're able to get players like Caleb Williams to come and Lincoln Riley to be there. They're not a dumpster fire. They're a great program.
That can also speak to the fact of how great of a coach Lincoln Riley is, too, the fact that he could do that so quickly.
That's what I was trying to gather. We are.
I just said Lincoln Riley's a great coach. I mean, how am I saying not to give him respect? I said he's way better than Clay Helton. I'm just saying it's not a complete surprise.
Because here's the thing. Is it that USC just stunk because the culture was bad during that time? Or is it literally that Clay Helton is a bad coach?
How is this miraculous, though? I just don't understand, man. I mean, again, they had a great season, but they have a top 10 talented roster. They should be doing what they just did. Maybe it's a bit surprising because it was year one, but they had the talent with Clay Helton. They didn't get it done. That's why they fired him. They didn't win enough. That's why they fired him. That's why everybody's going off at Jimbo, because you got the best talent in the country and you literally can't get it together because everyone's having issues in the locker room and they go 5-7. There were some injuries, but I mean, literally USC should be doing what they just did. Lincoln Riley is a great coach, but he does this everywhere he goes. He's a great offensive mind. He can't coach defense, and he was able to bring in a lot of great players. USC already had a lot of great players. It's not the biggest surprise in the world. They overexceeded expectations. I had them in my honorable mentions, very close to being in the top 10, just like Will, but there were other teams that deserved the spotlight that don't ever win anything.
Ooh, Roger Dodger does bring up a good point.
I think we've talked about this enough. Let's move on. Let's stop the USC talk.
I mean, I'm sorry if I went crazy. I'm not going crazy. I'm just making an argument. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I had them in the honorable mentions.
Does anyone else have any questions for me besides
I think
USC?
your list is good. I mean, like I said, I said with Carolina that they're high, but I mean, it's not a bad list.
So why is UConn so high for you?
Okay, because UConn is a basketball school. And basketball schools normally don't care about their football program as much. But now that they are putting in the effort and UConn won 6 games after being atrocious for so long that's a pretty amazing jump. To go from 1 wins to no wins to 1 win to 6 wins, that's pretty great for a basketball school now becoming a football school, possibly if they want to put money and effort into it.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think there should be some sliding around, but I mean it is your top 10, so I mean I don't really agree with you in certain areas. Like I don't know, Tulane I think should be higher, but I mean like I said, everything you have is justified. I would probably put, if I wanted SC on this list, realistically probably at 7, Oregon State at 5. Tennessee at 9 and Florida State at 6 would probably. But again,
Which,
it's your list, and I respect it.
yeah, not to go down no rabbit hole, I just put USC in my top 5 because I'm a little more impressed than maybe you guys were, which is cool. Not everyone was impressed the same level. Like Jackson, Jeffrey don't believe much, and maybe you don't, Buck. I'm like, which is cool. This is our list, our opinion, and we respect each other's list.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else got any more questions before we move on to Will?
Let's get this show going.
Mike, can you go first? Sorry, I'll try to find mine.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, I guess I should put this out there. Honorable mention. I'm gonna give it. I didn't have one. I'm gonna give it to USC, and that's all I'm gonna say on that specific thing. Syracuse at 10 did better than last year, so it's a surprise. UConn, they're usually a real dumpster fire. So them winning 6 games and being bowl eligible surprised me. Duke, they're also usually a dumpster fire. So that's why they kind of surprised me. Illinois, usual dumpster fire. Washington, they're starting to finally turn around. Be like they were with Jake Browning. Kansas State, at 5 for me, mostly just riding off of Big 12 champions. Kansas at 4, again, usual dumpster fire, huge turnaround. Lance Leopold, not enough credit, man. Not enough credit. Oregon State, usual up and down team. A big surprise this year, beating the teams that they beat. That Civil War win weighs heavy with me for the surprise. Tulane, everybody's talked about it, so I won't say anything else. And same with TCU. TCU is the most legit surprise team of the year, and that's all I got.
Tennessee wasn't a surprise.
Do what?
You didn't think Tennessee was a surprise? Top 10.
I mean, it would. I don't know. I guess I would, based on who I have in there, maybe take out Syracuse and put them in. I wasn't completely thinking.
Oh, you're good. I was just wondering. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Only question I have about that list is Syracuse. Other than that, good to go, really.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they don't necessarily deserve to be in it, but I got to like Illinois, and I'm like, okay, who else?
Well, to each their own. There you go. Austin.
Um, I mostly agree with this list. I think Syracuse is another one that yeah, you can argue that maybe they don't need to be there necessarily, but I understand why they're there.
Hmm.
But other than that, it's a pretty good list.
Yeah. Well,
Is there like I know Oregon State was awesome this year, but was there a reason that you had them all the way up at 3? I mean, they were a decent team last year, and they did take that step this year, but for me, it wasn't like that impressive.
Well, I mean, to your point, we've seen a lot of their kind of year that they've had before, where it's like really good going into the Civil War, and then they just get mollywopped by Oregon, and they finally were just like, you know what, we're gonna return the favor for once. I mean, they actually had key big wins, and especially Oregon. I mean, I don't know. I guess some of the Jacksons rubbing off on me, and it's just putting Oregon State a little higher than maybe they should be. I mean, altogether, Oregon State belongs in this list. It's just, I guess, a matter of who thinks they should go where.
Okay. Anything else from Buckeye Mike?
Nope, all good.
Okay. Where's mine? All right. So number 10. So for number 10, for me, I had Florida State. It was underachievement after underachievement, but this year I didn't think they'd break through as much as they did. Kansas State, I didn't really have them as a contender in the Big 12. I mean, I'm like, maybe they can surprise some people, but man, they surprised people making a New Year's Six bowl. Number 8, Illinois. I expect them to look this good under Bird, especially after that Indiana loss. And I mean, that didn't change my ranking of them, but I'm like, wow, they might go like 4-8. But they did really good this year and kind of choked away the Big Ten West, but still impressive. Number 7, I have Duke. And they went 1-17 their last 2 years before they brought in Mike Elko. And yes, they didn't have any impressive wins per se, but they really impressed me what they did this year. And number 6, Kansas. I mean, you could see that they were building to a bowl game, but not to a bowl game after last year. I'm like, okay, last year they beat Texas. They got over that Big 12 hump. They'll probably beat maybe 2 Big 12 teams this year. But they ended up doing even better and ended up making a bowl game. Number 4 and 5, I have the Huskies of Washington and UConn. So for Washington, I did not think that I think maybe they would make a bowl game this year with Kalen DeBoer, but I didn't think they would go. I believe they went 10-2, right? Or did they go 9-3? I think they went 10-2, and they did have that. And they did have that bad loss to Arizona State, which might have hopped them over Tennessee. And then with UConn, I did not think that I thought maybe they would win like 3 games this year. I thought they would look better. But what Jim Mora Jr. did just really impressed me. Like making a bowl game with UConn, I did not think he'd be able to do that this fast. Number 3, Tennessee. Never in my life of watching college football. I started watching about 2007. Did I ever see Tennessee beat Alabama? And they did it this year. I'm like, oh my gosh, it happened. And yes, they did fall apart at the end with the South Carolina loss, but it was still a very impressive season for Tennessee. I just wish their fans weren't that annoying on social media. And then Tulane, 2 wins last year. I know they had a lot of injuries, but to make a New Year's Six bowl after a 2-win season, for me, that just automatically puts them in there. And I didn't think they would. I thought they lost their chance when they lost to UCF, but to turn it around and to beat Cincinnati at Cincinnati, breaking that losing streak. I mean, that winning streak for Cincinnati, that long winning streak, to me, just put them over the top and had to put them in the top 2. And number 1, I have TCU. They went from, I believe they were 4-8. They were 5-7 last year, or 4-8. They go 13-1, make the college football playoff. No one expected that. Just simply an amazing job for TCU. Any questions, guys?
I don't really have any questions. To your point about Illinois losing to Indiana didn't affect your ranking. Yeah, if they played Indiana later in the season, they more likely would have won. Again, that's the whole week one debate. Doesn't justify it. It doesn't mean that you're a bad team if you lose, like Utah losing to Florida. Week 1 results should be kind of taken with a grain of salt. Illinois was clearly better than Indiana. They just lost the game because it was a week 1 game. But yeah, I don't really have any questions.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of bird?
No
is
questions on my end.
What's that?
I just looked up Illinois mascot. I don't know what type of bird it is.
I
But...
was talking about number 2 and number 8.
Oh, number 2 is a pelican for Tulane.
I had a feeling it was. It's like he's got a lot of water storage in his mouth, I bet.
Yeah.
The number 8 bird looks kind of angry, though. He looks mad.
Yeah.
I don't want to get on his bad side. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
Who is it? Is it Louisville?
It's Illinois.
Oh, it's Illinois. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Austin, what were your 2 questions for Will?
No, I said I had no questions.
Okay.
Oh, my error. I think it's me being tired. Just kind of. Oh man.
Why does 4 or 5 get the cutest pictures? Well, who doesn't love a good husky dog?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, puppy dogs rule.
I would go Washington at 5 and UConn at 4.
Oh my
Justin's
God.
at it again.
Okay,
Really?
blue guy.
Come on, guys. Come on.
And Edward says, "Come on, Mike, that bird doesn't have teeth."
Well, you got to realize that picture's like that big.
Oh, it's hard to see. I didn't even know what some of these were myself. They're cool,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah, it's not a bad choice the way you went with it. You know, it's cool. It's different, but sometimes it's hard to tell.
So, honorable mention for me was UCLA because Chip Kelly finally got it together. But I have something to say about Dante Moore, who's going to UCLA. Now, Dante was originally committed, if you guys might have forgotten, he was committed to Notre Dame. He was committed to Notre Dame and then took and then he wanted some of Daddy Phil's money, so he went over to Eugene. But suddenly, now he cares about playing time and went to UCLA. Now, he could have but why? He should have just stayed at South Bend. He should have stayed at South Bend. He was going to play with a better team with a chance to make the college football playoff this year why didn't Dante? It's not all about the money, Dante. You're gonna get the money later with how good you're gonna play. You're gonna get the NIL later. You should have waited for the money and went to South Bend, Dante. He may regret this. He may get hurt because the UCLA O-line is nowhere near the O-line that Notre Dame has. That's all I have to say about Dante. Bad decision.
But with that being said, guys, I think this has been a really good show. And I'd like to tell everybody, if you like this content, make sure you join us back here Thursday night as we will be doing Bowl Pick'ems Part 2 because it is officially bowl season. We'll be picking some of the best bowl games out there. And make sure to like and subscribe. Enjoy your all's night. And we will see you back here Thursday for Bowl Pick'ems Part 2.
Exactly. You have an awesome night. And don't forget, we have
Thanks
some
for being here, everybody.
We have some
Everybody have a good one.
Stay tuned.
I just wanted an
And go
excuse to talk
Cards,
about Dante more, Tim.